Philadelphia Eagles team preview here at FTN. We bring in the only person I talk to who's been fantastic for us in the past, Wulf of The Athletic, on Twitter at Bo_Wulf. Bo, let's get right into it. The backfield, the Eagles, Miles Sanders, great season last year after not scoring the year before, $7 million. He's gone to Carolina. So what we have here is Rashad Penny. We have DeAndre Swift. We have Boston Scott, who I saw is actually taking the most money this year, $1.9 million. Talk to us about the backfield. Who's going to get the touches here? Because obviously Eagles, Super Bowl contender, great offensive line, a lot of value in that backfield. Please solve this conundrum for us.
Yeah. If anybody says they have an answer like definitively about how these carries are going to play out, I think they're kidding themselves. I was just having this conversation on our podcast, Birds with Friends, with my co-host, Zach Berman, who covers the team with me. He is higher on DeAndre Swift. His opinion is that DeAndre Swift is going to be sort of this year's Miles Sanders, where they've got a running back who comes with pedigree, who is going to be a free agent next offseason. They're going to give him as many touches as he can handle, sort of run him into the ground, find ways to get him the ball as a receiver where he is really dangerous. He thinks he's going to be the lead guy. I'm a little bit skeptical of that for a few reasons. One is that, his like production and on a per carry basis, his numbers have not been super great. And it's not like he was playing behind a bad offensive line in Detroit. I mean, outside of Philadelphia, that was about as good of an offensive line as there was. And he sort of lost his job each of the past couple seasons. If you're talking about like a relative to like the price point of where you're going to get them in fantasy, I think the best buy for me is Kenny Gainwell.
Wow.
I think for a few reasons. I think he is the most reliable of the group. We know that Rashad Penny has had this very extensive injury history. DeAndre Swift has a bit of an injury history himself. He's missed at least 3 games each of the past 3 seasons. Kenny Gainwell is also, and I was surprised by this looking at these numbers, he is in terms of avoiding negative carries, he's been the best running back in the league over the past 2 years. He's the only running back who has gained yards on over 90% of his carries over the past 2 seasons. And if you look at this offense, which is so running back friendly, I think there's something to be said for that. He's also been healthy. He's never missed a game for injury. So I think there's something to be said for reliability. That said, if you're looking for more of a sort of a best ball type situation where you want those spike weeks, I do think that Rashad Penny has the most upside of these guys. I think he's, when healthy, and it's a huge caveat for him because he's never healthy, but when he is healthy, he is the best of these running backs. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he has a couple, big sort of spike weeks. But the big takeaway for me is that, somebody here is going to have a really good season, but if you think you know who it is, you're probably wrong.
Well, the one thing I know for sure is when the Eagles play the Giants, it's going to be Boston Scott. I think we all know that. Well, let's go to the rest part of the offense here. Jalen Hurts, franchise quarterback, tremendous season, of course. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, rinse, repeat, fantastic offense. The guy that I am high on is Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert was really starting to become a dominant force, then got injured last year, but did find his way to be 5th in fantasy points per game. If he stays healthy, can that production actually increase, or do you think there is a ceiling because, of course, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith are there?
Yeah, I think that if you're thinking about it from a macro perspective, there is probably room for him to grow because, it's not a nice thing to say, but there's probably going to be an injury at some point, maybe not a major one, but just like, A.J. Brown played every game last season for the first time in his career, right? It's unlikely, just odds-wise, that the Eagles are going to make it through at wide receiver fully healthy again. And if one of those guys misses any time, all of a sudden Dallas Goedert becomes a more focal point of the offense. I mean, those 3 guys, it's the highest share of target share for like the top 3 targets of any team in the league. Like their offense, their passing game goes to A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert. You can count on that. And I don't think that's going to change. And that's part of the reason why I'm not quite as high on DeAndre Swift. But I do think that there is room for Dallas Goedert to grow. That said, he is, of those 3, the one who has the most extensive injury history. And I think he's a little bit like he's kind of sneaky old. He's 28 this year and turning 29.
Yes.
And so it's not like he is, ready to hit his athletic prime. He's sort of in it and approaching the end of it. And so like the big Dallas Goedert breakout that we've all been expecting may not come, but I think that he is very reliable as long as he's healthy.
You know, the critics of the Eagles will say that their schedule was very easy last year and that their defense wasn't as good as maybe people thought it was. Dominant performance, tremendous team, looking for that Super Bowl return this year. Talk about the challenges with the Eagles of a little bit of a harder schedule. You know, I think a lot of that is unfair because this Eagle team really played well down the stretch in the playoffs. So talk about the harder schedule. Do you see challenges? Is there a feeling that the defense feels they need to step up a little bit? What's the vibe here going in, given that the rumor is that their schedule last year was so easy, this year maybe a little bit harder?
Yeah, the schedule is definitely harder this year. There's a crazy stretch in the third quarter of the season where it goes like Cowboys, Chiefs, Bills, Niners, Cowboys again.
Yep.
And it's, we're gonna learn some things about this team. I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with last year. I mean, they played the schedule they played and they blew those teams out, right?
Yep.
And so the real mark of a good team is whether you can win those games handily. And I think they proved themselves. In terms of the defense, I'm sort of the opinion that like there are maybe a handful of really, really good defenses. There are some terrible defenses, and then there's everybody else. And when you're playing at the highest level against really good offense, defense sort of doesn't matter. Like there's really not a lot of stuff to be gained. And like in that Chiefs in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, when the offense was that good, there's really not much they could do. Now we can complain about like the quality of the field or anything like that. But aside from forcing turnovers and getting sacks, that's pretty much all you can do. But there has been a ton of turnover on defense. And so there's every expectation that the defense is not going to be as good as it was last year. They lost their defensive coordinator and Jonathan Gannon. Sean Desai takes over. They lost both starting safeties, both starting linebackers, and Javon Hargrave, who was their best pass rushing defensive tackle. So there's a lot of change. Their linebacker situation is not good. It's Nakobe Dean, who played like 20 snaps on defense last year, and Nicholas Morrow, who is a journeyman. At safety, they went out and signed Terrell Edmonds. They've got Reed Blankenship, who was an undrafted safety last year, looked good, but he's still an undrafted player and a second-year player. And then they have a third-round pick, Sidney Brown, who's competing for a job at corner. Even though like they kept Darius Slay and James Bradbury, those guys are both over 30, an extra year. It's hard to believe that they're going to be as good as they were last year. They're counting a lot on Jalen Carter, the first-round pick, making a real impact right away in the middle. And other than that, it's like you need Hassan Reddick to be as good as he was last year. You need Josh Sweat to take a little bit of a leap. And I think it's reasonable to think the defense is not going to be as good as it was last year, which is why having an elite offense, which they do, is what really matters. And I think from their perspective, that's how they build the team out.
Yeah, Bo, on top of it, as always, that schedule, you hit it right on the head. They have Miami at home week 7, then at Washington week 8, rivalry game on the road, then Dallas home week 9, they're bye in week 10, at KC, home Buffalo, San Francisco, at Dallas, at Seattle, right up
brutal.
to week 8.
At Seattle, yeah. It's not easy.
That is not easy. Listen, great stuff as always. One more question, then we'll get you out of here. We're ready for the preseason. We have preseason DFS, players that pop. We love that stuff here at FTN. Who are one or two players, offense or defense, either side, someone you think that we should keep an eye on that could make a contribution this year, either right away, later in the year, could be a rookie, second-year player, two players maybe that you think on either side of the ball that you think we are maybe undervaluing that could make an impact for the Eagles this year?
I would say if you're looking for somebody else on offense who could contribute a little bit, like really low level, I think the two guys are one is Olamide Zaccheaus, who the Eagles signed from the Falcons, and he's been around. He's productive. The Eagles do not have a lot of wide receiver depth. After the top two guys, it's Quez Watkins, who was a little bit of a disappointment last year, but has speed to burn, and then Zaccheaus, and that's it. And after that, it's all undrafted guys and Britton Covey, who is a return specialist. And then the other guy who I think could be like a pop-up player at times, depending on injury situations, is Grant Calcaterra, who is a backup tight end. He was a 6th-round pick last year. He has more receiving chops. Jack Stoll is the number 2 tight end, but he is much more of a block-first tight end. If Goedert misses time or if one of the receivers misses time, I think there's a possibility that Calcaterra becomes kind of a dart throw. He's got some receiving chops, and second, tight ends is a position where it takes guys some time usually to get that production. On defense, if we're talking about like racking up tackles, I think there's a good chance that Christian Ellis, who is a backup linebacker, is a guy who ends up maybe playing more snaps than Nicholas Morrow. I wouldn't be surprised if he's sort of like the Alex Singleton of the Eagles season this year, who they had a couple years ago. So those are some really down roster guys for you.
Folks, his Twitter handle says a straight shooter, and that's what Bo is. I don't think anyone has given us more information in 10 minutes than he just did. Folks, Bo Wulf on Twitter at Bo_Wulf, writes for The Athletic, does amazing work for the Eagles. Bo, thank you so much for a few minutes. You totally whet our appetite, ready for the preseason and the season to start. We'll check in with you in a little bit and see how things are going.
Thanks, Mike.